Hello. My name is Detective Grit. I have been called to a crime scene. This is unlike any other crime scene I have ever been to, as the evidence has been deteriorated by time, and all of the witnesses are dead. Within the confines of this crime scene, I will try to prove the existence of a conspiracy that has been alleged after the fact by people who were not alive when the conspiracy was occurring. From only the limited evidence I collect, I will have to prove to a prosecutor that a certain agency was at work at the crime scene. This will be based only on the affidavits that had been collected and the scant physical evidence available. It will be up to you to decide if there is enough evidence proving my case. You will be asked to act as the grand jury, and any objections to the evidence will require further hearings. It is my job, as the representative of the state, to prove to you that there is enough evidence to go to trial. I do not have to provide a body, only enough evidence from primary witnesses taken in affidavit, and secondary evidence taken from historical documents based on state records, that there was a body. I will go further and point out motive, opportunity, and intent. After presenting what evidence I find, I will ask you to make a decision. By majority vote, you will decide whether there is enough evidence for an indictment. Remember, an indictment is neither a judgment nor a determination of guilt or innocence. An indictment is saying that there is enough evidence for the prosecution to go forward with a criminal case. If further evidence is brought forward after I present my evidence, it will be added to the case when it is brought forward for trial. This is a murder case. As a representative of the state and sworn police officer, it is my duty to seek justice in this case, to track down any available evidence, and to act as an objective witness if the case is brought to trial. Since a coroner's inquest has not been performed, I must rely on eyewitness testimony to lead me to any suspects and to any evidence that may implicate any perpetrators of this crime. At this point, it may be wise if you stop and seek refreshment before I continue. The crime was murder, the unlawful execution of an innocent man based on hearsay evidence and falsified testimony. The accused was neither given an attorney for the defense, nor was the crime for which he was accused considered a capital offense at the time. Since there is no statute of limitations in the case of murder, and since the case in question has had such an effect on people, I felt it was necessary to re-examine the case and determine if there are any guilty parties to this heinous crime. The victim of this crime was one Yeshua Bar Yosef. Affidavits from the witnesses to his brutal murder failed to document the exact year of his death, and we can only place it on or around the year 33 of the Christian era. He was murdered around the time of Pesach or Passover in the city of Jerusalem. We know that he was assaulted by local law enforcement personnel, beaten with a flagellum, forced to drag a wooden cross quite a distance while bleeding on the pavement, then nailed to the cross. He died most likely of asphyxiation, but suffered one spear wound to his abdomen from a local law enforcement officer. Upon his death it was reported that there were a number of events including a solar eclipse, an earthquake, and the damage by unknown persons of a valuable veil in a nearby temple. As of this time, there have been no reports filed by the temple clerics of any vandalism of said veil, though there are reports from later witnesses. Any reports were most likely destroyed by a conflagration that destroyed both the temple and its outbuildings. The evidence thus reported was recorded by a number of individuals. The most reliable report, coming from interviews with eyewitnesses, was provided by a certain Dr. Laukas, more commonly called Luke, a Greco-Syrian physician and chronicler. Other accounts include the writings of Matthew, Mark, and John. Certain details between these accounts differ, but what can be ascertained is the evidence previously given. There exists at this time no evidence that these works were not written by the authors mentioned. The minor differences in these texts indicate they were written from different points of view about the same events that had taken place. I repeat, there is no evidence of collusion between the authors of these texts. Minor differences in eyewitness testimony is common, yet in no way invalidates the testimony. Since enough evidence has been provided that there was an unlawful execution, I will now show that this execution was premeditated, not by the individuals involved in his arrest, trial, but by a close family member, specifically, his father. Eyewitness testimony has been recorded that his father had planned his death long before he was born. These individuals did not know this, Yeshua bar Yosef, and found it necessary to write down the information as it was directly reported to them from this father. The name of the father of the victim is, in Latin, Jehovah. It has been reported that Yeshua, whom I shall now call Jesus for sake of clarity, knew of his father's plans and actively sought to ensure those plans were carried out. Since the crucifixion was not self-inflicted, nor did he at any time threaten to harm any police officer, this cannot be ruled suicide, nor suicide by cop. It is doubtful after the severe beating he had received by law enforcement that he would have been able to resist crucifixion. As to the affidavit written by a certain Isaiah, a whistleblower living hundreds of years before Jesus was born, there exists copies of his affidavit that predate the birth of Jesus by over 100 years. These affidavits were recovered in the caves in Qumran, near the Dead Sea. These and other writings, including the Torah, the Holy Scroll of the Jews, go to motive and intent. To show how far back his father had been planning to kill him, we will have to go to the earliest writings of the Jews, of which Jesus was a tribal member. It was in the book of Genesis that the story of Abraham comes to light. For disbelieving Jehovah, Abraham was ordered to sacrifice his own son. Thus the stage was set. Instead of allowing Abraham to sacrifice his son for his sins, Jehovah instead provided a substitute. Later, in the Torah, this substitutional sacrifice was made codified in the laws of the Jews. For each sin, a sacrifice was required. By the time of Jesus, the temple sacrifice had become corrupt, with priests and rabbis requiring expenditures far in excess of what the penitent could afford. Further, the priests and rabbis held a stranglehold on the market for creatures deemed worthy of sacrifice, and charged the penitent in what was called temple money, or tokens, which one had to exchange legal currency for. They had turned the temple sacrifice away from true worship and instead turned it into a carnival of blood and enriched themselves on the labor of the oppressed poor. To end this practice required a sacrifice that did away with the practice altogether. In order to change the laws in ancient days, one had to kill the king. In order to replace the sacrifice, one had to kill God. It was into this scene that Jesus came. He was God incarnate, the nature of man and God, sent to be sacrificed not only for the sins of Israel, but for the whole world. The Jews had failed to spread his word to the world. Instead they had reverted to xenophobia and the legalism which became Judaism. God did not forget his promise to them, but he had to make salvation and knowledge of his will available not only in Judea, but in all the world. Jehovah was very specific in his choice for the sacrifice. During the time of the wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites had been plagued by poisonous snakes. Moses placed a substitution snake, a bronze snake, upon a staff, that if anyone were bitten by the poisonous snakes, all they had to do was look at the bronze effigy and they would be saved. Likewise, anyone who looked to the sacrifice of Jesus, Jehovah's Son, and believed in him would likewise be saved. Further, as Israel blessed his sons at his death, he gave his blessing to Dan. At the end, he said, "For your salvation do I wait." Here, salvation is with in Yeshua. Thus Jesus was sent here to save us from judgment. Much of the evidence I have presented here went rather quickly, and there's more evidence available. I did not present every quote or Bible verse. I shall leave that to the attorneys. Now as to motive. Why would Jehovah kill his own son? There was no money to be gained, nor land. Jesus had at no time spread any evil word against his Father. The only motive given is love. God loves you. He loves you so much that he killed his only son for you. Yes, you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting. Peace out, dude.